Welcome to my channel, The Human Frontier. The first rule of speaking in the Imperial Hall of the Alienempire was simple. Only speak when spoken to. The second rule was even more important. Never disagree with the Emperor. Unfortunately for me, I broke both rules in the same sentence. And when I did, everyone in the hall went silent. Everyone except the princess. My name is Lieutenant Noah Carter of the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet. At the time, humanity had only recently stepped onto the galactic stage. We were new, inexperienced, and in the eyes of many ancient civilizations, barely worth noticing. The Alienempire, on the other hand, had ruled their region of space for nearly 1,000 years. Their fleets controlled dozens of star systems. Their soldiers were legendary. Their emperor was feared. And their royal court. A place where one wrong word could end a career, or a life. Which made it the worst possible place for a human officer to accidentally speak his mind. The Imperial Hall was massive. The ceiling stretched nearly 200 feet above us, carved with ancient star maps and glowing symbols that shifted slowly like living constellations. Tall obsidian pillars lined the chamber, each etched with stories of past wars and victories. At the far end of the hall stood the throne. It was carved from a single block of dark crystal, towering above the floor like a monument. Seated upon it was Emperor Varric Tarin, ruler of the Alienempire. He looked exactly how you'd expect a galactic emperor to look. Tall. Imposing. Wrapped in armor that shimmered with faint energy patterns. His eyes were a cold metallic gold. Beside the throne stood his daughter, Princess Lyra. Unlike her father, she wasn't wearing heavy armor. Instead, she wore a flowing silver uniform that marked her as heir to the empire. And unlike the rest of the court, she looked curious. Especially when she glanced in my direction. I tried not to notice. Humans were only here as diplomatic observers. Our role was to listen, learn, and avoid embarrassing Earth. Which meant staying quiet. Unfortunately, the discussion that day made staying quiet very difficult. A massive holographic projection hovered in the center of the hall. It displayed a distant star system. Red warning markers blinked across several planets. This, said Admiral Zareth, one of the Empire's senior commanders, is the Talvros system. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. The system has resisted Imperial authority for decades, Zareth continued. Its colonies refuse to pay tribute or accept our governance. Murmurs spread through the court. Their defenses are weak, the Admiral said confidently. Our fleet can eliminate resistance within days. The hologram shifted. A massive Arcanus battle fleet appeared on the display. Hundreds of ships. Dreadnoughts. Planetary siege platforms. Weapons capable of glassing entire continents. The invasion begins tomorrow, Zareth concluded. The Emperor nodded once. Approved. Just like that. An entire star system was about to be invaded. The court responded with quiet approval. Nobles whispered to each other. Military officers nodded in agreement. No one questioned it. Except me. Because I had been studying that star system for the past 3 weeks. And something about the plan bothered me. A lot. I told myself to stay quiet. This wasn't my empire. This wasn't my war. But the more the discussion continued, the worse the feeling became. Then Admiral Zareth said something that made my stomach drop. The Talvros colonies have no allies. They will stand alone. That's when I made the mistake. I spoke. That's not true. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. The entire hall froze. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. The Emperor's gaze locked onto mine. Cold. Sharp. Dangerous. Who spoke? He asked. I swallowed. Lieutenant Carter, I said quietly. Human officer. The silence that followed felt like standing in front of a firing squad. "You interrupted an imperial council," the emperor said slowly. "Yes, Your Majesty. And you claim our intelligence is incorrect." I hesitated. Then I did the stupidest thing possible. "Yes." The hall went completely silent. Some nobles looked shocked. Others looked amused. Several military officers looked angry. Admiral Zaretha's expression darkened. "Explain yourself, human." I took a breath. "Well, according to the data we've gathered, the Talvros system has been sending encrypted transmissions for months." "To whom?" the emperor asked. "That's the problem," I said. "We can't tell." Zareth scoffed. "Speculation." "Not exactly," I replied. I stepped forward and activated my datapad. A new holographic projection appeared beside the imperial display. Lines of signal patterns filled the air. "These transmissions follow a repeating quantum frequency pattern," I explained. "Which means they're not random." The emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Continue." "They're calling someone," I said. "And whoever they're calling." I paused. "They're close." The silence in the hall grew even heavier. Admiral Zareth crossed his arms. "You're suggesting another fleet is nearby?" "Yes." "And your evidence is a few unusual signals?" "No," I said. "My evidence is what happened the last time humanity saw those signals." The emperor leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" I met his gaze. A fleet appeared. The court erupted in whispers. "What fleet?" someone asked. I hesitated again, because saying the name out loud was not something most humans liked doing. But the emperor had asked. So I answered. "The Aegis Collective." The reaction was immediate. Several nobles went pale. One advisor nearly dropped his datapad. The emperor's expression hardened. The Aegis Collective was not just another civilization. They were ancient, extremely powerful, and fiercely protective of the systems under their protection. If the Talvros colonies had contacted them, this invasion could turn into a war the Arcanis Empire wasn't expecting. Admiral Zareth shook his head. "Ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked. "If the Aegis fleet arrives during your invasion, your forces will be caught between planetary defenses and an incoming armada." Zaretha's voice rose slightly. "You're a junior officer from a primitive world. You presume to lecture the Empire on strategy?" I shrugged slightly. "I'm just pointing out the math." The court went silent again. The emperor studied me carefully. Then he asked one question. "Why did you speak?" The answer came easier than I expected. "Because if you're wrong, millions of people die." The silence that followed felt endless. Then someone laughed. Softly. I turned. Princess Lyra. She was smiling. The only person in the entire hall who didn't look offended or shocked. "Interesting," she said. The emperor glanced at her. "You find this amusing?" "I find it refreshing," she replied. She stepped forward slightly. "Everyone else in this hall agrees with you out of fear or loyalty." She gestured toward me. "He disagreed because he thinks you're about to make a mistake." The emperor's gaze shifted back to me. "You're very bold for a human." "Or very stupid," I admitted. The princess laughed again. The emperor remained silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Admiral Zareth. "Delay the invasion." The entire court gasped. "Your Majesty," Zareth said. "Run a full signal analysis on the Talvros transmissions," the emperor continued. "If the human is wrong, we proceed. And if he's right." The emperor looked back at me. "Then we avoid a war." 3 days later, the results came in. The signals were real. And they were answered. An Aegis Collective fleet had already begun moving toward the Talvros system. If the Arcanis Empire had launched their invasion on schedule, their armada would have flown directly into a trap. The Imperial fleet stood down. Millions of lives were spared. And suddenly the human officer who interrupted the Emperor was no longer seen as a foolish outsider. He was seen as the man who stopped a war. A week later I was summoned to the palace again. This time the atmosphere felt very different. The court watched me with curiosity rather than irritation. The Emperor regarded me from his throne. "You were correct," he said simply. "Yes, Your Majesty. You saved my fleet from walking into a disaster. I just followed the data." He nodded slightly. "Still." Then he surprised everyone. "Lieutenant Noah Carter, you are welcome in this court." That was about the highest praise an outsider could receive. But before I could respond, the princess spoke again. "You know," Lyra said casually, "most people would have stayed silent." I smiled slightly. "I probably should have." She shook her head. "No." Her eyes sparkled with interest. "I'm glad you didn't. Because when everyone else in the hall fell silent, the only person who seemed happy to hear what I said was the princess. And somehow, I had the feeling this wasn't the last time I'd be speaking up in the Imperial Hall. Thank you for listening. Subscribe for more cinematic science fiction stories.